I was driving to the grocery store yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the first week in November, so you know what that means. The holiday chaos has officially begun.
I'm here, absolutely.
And I see this gray sedan, maybe a 10-year-old Nissan, and it just cuts across 2 lanes of traffic, no signal. Just trying to make an exit he almost missed.
The classic move.
Classic. So the driver behind him, of course, just lays on the horn, a long, furious blast. Mm-hmm. And the Nissan driver, in response, slams on his brakes in the exit lane. A full-on brake check, just out of pure spite.
Wow.
Second driver has to swerve. He's gesturing wildly. I'm just watching all this in my rearview mirror, and it's like watching 2 nervous systems just lighting each other up.
Yeah.
It was pure entitlement, pure impulse. Just pure rage. And I couldn't help but wonder, what happens when that Nissan driver gets home?
That is the question, isn't it?
Right. What happens when he parks in the driveway and walks inside? Does that person who just risked a high-speed collision over a horn honk simply turn that impulse off at the front door? Or does the rehearsal just end and the real performance begin? Okay, let's unpack this. That scenario, that kind of reckless road aggression, is terrifyingly common.
Way too common.
But the question we're really focusing on today is the continuum. The startling psychological and physiological overlap between that chronic aggressive behavior in public, what we call road rage, and intimate partner violence, or IPV. We're going deep on the idea that these are not separate things, but maybe 2 points on the same continuous line of aggression, and they're just differentiated by what? Context and opportunity.
That's our mission today. We are going to meticulously analyze that continuum. And this means looking at, forensic psychology, the hard neurobiology of habitual dominance seeking.
Wiring.
The wiring, exactly. And maybe most importantly, the clinical solutions. We'll spend a good amount of time on models like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and its specialized adaptation, dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which are, they're fundamental to domestic violence intervention.
So we're trying to understand how aggression is structured, how it's a pattern that sort of transcends the environment it's in.
Precisely. And the initial critical insight for anyone trying to grasp this is realizing that chronic, high-intensity aggression, whether it's aimed at a stranger in a 3-ton vehicle or a loved one at home, is rarely random. It's almost never isolated.
It's practice.
It's a highly practiced behavior. It's a language, you could say, a reflexive way of relating to the world that's built on this expectation of control and dominance. When you see persistent road aggression, you are witnessing a fully developed interpersonal aggression pattern. It's just ready to be deployed in any setting where that person perceives a threat to their self-worth or their authority.
So the car itself, the environment of the car is what makes this overlap so clear, right? I mean, our sources describe it as the perfect testing ground for this type of aggression.
It really is.
And you think about it, it makes perfect sense. You're confined, you have this perceived anonymity, which, lowers your inhibitions. Yeah. And then the external world traffic, delays. It's providing these constant, legitimate stressors. It becomes this pressurized, mobile cocoon where drivers feel they can practice control and assert dominance with what feels like very limited immediate consequence.
It's true. The psychological architecture shared by the chronic road aggressor and the person who perpetrates IPV is, it's strikingly similar.
And what's at the foundation of that?
At the foundation, you find this common ground of high trait anger and impulsivity. These are individuals whose default setting is a very low frustration tolerance. This leads to quick, explosive, or just disproportionate reactions when any kind of friction occurs. Their emotional response just accelerates way faster than other people's.
But the impulse is only half the story.
Only half. The sustained pattern, the thing that makes it chronic, is maintained by 2 really strong cognitive mechanisms. First, there's the process of what we call externalized blame and self-justification.
Meaning they never think they're the problem.
Never. The aggressive driver doesn't believe they're wrong. The rage is always justified because of the idiots on the road or the incompetence or rudeness of others. They're just correcting a perceived injustice.
And the second you perceive your aggression as justified, you remove all the internal brakes.
Precisely. And that works identically in IPV. The abusive partner rarely, if ever, accepts ownership of the violence. The aggression is justified by blaming the victim's disrespect or provoking behavior or their lack of submission.
So the aggressive act becomes a tool.
It's a tool to regulate their internal distress, that feeling of being out of control, by externalizing the fault onto the environment or the partner. The aggressive act provides this momentary self-serving relief. It feels good.
And the second mechanism?
The second core mechanism is entitlement. On the road, this shows up as feeling entitled to the space, entitled to speed, entitled to have traffic just bend to their urgency.
It's the belief that their time, their objective, is more important than anyone else's safety or, just following the rules.
Yes. And that sense of entitlement is highly portable. It transitions so easily to people. The belief that a partner must fulfill their needs, must behave in a way that upholds their perceived authority, or has to anticipate their emotional state.
And when that deeply held entitlement gets challenged, either by someone cutting them off on the highway or by a partner just asserting a simple boundary, that challenge is experienced as a profound personal attack.
And the entitlement turns explosive.
To illustrate just how tightly wound these two contexts are, we came across an anonymized case that was particularly resonant. It was the experience of a woman we'll call Sarah. She was at a specialized shelter, and the intake worker, just following protocol, asked in detail about her partner's driving habits. And Sarah immediately had this deeply emotional reaction. She explained that she hadn't consciously connected the two environments before, but the most acute fear she ever felt was in the car with him.
She described years of feeling paralyzed, right? Trapped inside this volatile environment.
Exactly. He would aggressively tailgate, flash his lights, scream threats out the window at other drivers for what he saw as even the slightest slights. He'd drive recklessly just to teach someone a lesson about respect. He had to win every single micro-confrontation.
And she realized something in that moment.
A light bulb moment. The constant explosive rage, the demonstration of this absolute need for control, the use of intimidation to prevent feeling slighted. She realized this was the exact same playbook he ran at home. It was just translated to a different stage.
And for professionals in, say, forensic psychology, chronic aggressive driving behaviors are increasingly recognized as a potent early indicator, a bright red flag for interpersonal violence risk.
So it's a signal.
It's a huge signal. These actions point to a baseline personality pattern that is wired for control through coercion and intimidation. They demonstrate a comfort level with high emotional volatility and risk-taking just for the sake of dominance.
So if we're looking at criminal profiling or a risk assessment, aggressive driving isn't just a traffic problem. It's confirmation of a deeper foundational instability.
Absolutely. We categorize these deeply ingrained traits, the externalized blame, the entitlement, the low impulse control. We call them dynamic risk factors.
And that term is key, right? Dynamic.
It's key because it means a trait associated with violence risk that, unlike static factors like, say, criminal history, can be changed through intervention. This gives us hope, but it also highlights the need for vigilance.
And the central shared trait that links the road and the home, as you mentioned earlier, is this idea of reactivity.
Yes, reactivity. These individuals operate with a significantly high baseline level of psychological and physiological arousal. They experience normal life friction, a small delay, a minor disagreement, a partner's difference of opinion, not as a simple annoyance, but as a deep, immediate personal offense that threatens their entire self-concept.
So it's not just anger. It's driven by a core fear of being powerless or humiliated.
Precisely. The aggression, the need to dominate, to scream, to break check, is very often a defense mechanism. It's an immediate, high-intensity strategy designed to prevent those deeper, more vulnerable feelings of powerlessness or shame from ever surfacing.
So the aggression is sort of wrapped in this cloak of self-righteousness.
It is. In their worldview, every minor provocation is proof that disrespect exists out there, and it must be violently corrected right now.
This brings us to the internal wiring. This high reactivity isn't just a choice or a mindset. It's a physiological response that becomes, well, pathologically reinforced. It's time to move from the behavioral justifications to the actual neurochemical engine driving this compulsion to dominate. Here's where it gets really interesting, especially in terms of finding therapeutic solutions.
Yeah, when we talk about aggression becoming a habit, we have to look at the biology. The sequence is rigid and highly efficient. It starts with the perceived threat. A slight in traffic or a challenge to authority at home hits the nervous system.
And that instantly triggers what?
Rising arousal. The sympathetic nervous system, our ancient fight-or-flight engine, activates immediately.
So we're talking about a chemical cascade.
A cascade, exactly. We're talking about adrenaline or epinephrine, which produces that immediate heart pounding and muscle tension, and norepinephrine, which specifically fuels the aggression and hypervigilance, the fight component of fight or flight. These hormones are designed to bypass conscious, reasoned thought.
And this is why the context is irrelevant. Once those chemicals are flowing, the body doesn't care if the threat is a speeding bus or a partner expressing a difference of opinion.
Exactly. The system is context irrelevant. Once the system is hot, it seeks release through confrontation or coercion, because that is the fastest way to relieve that overwhelming physical tension.
And if the aggressive behavior works,
If it achieves dominance, the other driver swerves away, the partner backs down, the brain registers that behavior as successful.
we heard a story about a man we'll call David, who perfectly articulated this cycle. David was in intervention therapy and described the internal feeling he got from aggressive driving. He recounted how, if someone tried to merge in front of him, he would accelerate just to prevent it, or swerve and lean on the horn.
And what did he say it felt like?
He told his therapist, "It feels good. It feels like I won something. It's a physical jolt, like electricity hitting me."
That jolt, David felt, is the hallmark of the adrenaline-dopamine feedback loop. And it is the absolute key to understanding the pathological nature of this aggression.
Break that down for us.
The adrenaline rush provides the initial intense physical energy, but the psychological reward, the relief from the threat of feeling powerless, the success in asserting dominance, that is reinforced by a flood of dopamine into the reward centers of the brain.
So the brain interprets the act of achieving dominance as an achievement, a solution to distress, and provides a powerful chemical reward to make sure the behavior is repeated the next time tension arises.
That is correct. This reinforcement loop hardens the aggressive pattern into a pathological habit. It teaches the limbic system, the emotional, impulsive part of the brain, that dominance is the most efficient and, frankly, the most pleasurable way to end internal discomfort.
And over time, this becomes an automatic shortcut in the brain.
It does. In chronic aggression, the more the person practices this quick aggressive resolution, the more they bypass the prefrontal cortex, the PFC. The PFC is the part of the brain responsible for executive functions like rational assessment, impulse control, considering long-term consequences.
The brakes.
The brakes. When the threat system is repeatedly triggered and rewarded, the emotional centers, like the amygdala, just take over. It cements a response where the person moves straight from a perceived slight to an aggressive action without any conscious, rational filtering.
So we're not just talking about someone making a bad choice. We're talking about their very neural pathways being rewired to favor aggression as the default, fastest, and most rewarding response.
Exactly. And let's not forget the role of chronic stress here. Individuals with this high reactivity often have elevated levels of cortisol, the primary stress hormone.
And what does that do?
High cortisol keeps the nervous system on edge, making the person hypervigilant for threats. This means the threshold for initiating that aggression sequence is lowered, making them much more likely to perceive a slight, like a slow driver or a benign comment, as an act of provocation that requires a fight response.
And what's crucial for you, the listener, to understand is that while the expression can differ, men might use physical intimidation or pursuit, while women might use verbal escalation, emotional withdrawal, or more covert control.
The neurochemistry is universal. The underlying motive is exactly the same, relieving that overwhelming internal tension, that high arousal, by asserting control or dominance over the environment or the relationship.
And that biological reality leads us directly to the necessary therapeutic intervention.
It has to. If the problem is rooted in a biologically reinforced habit, an addiction to the dominance high that bypasses rational thought, then simply telling someone to calm down or offering moral advice is completely useless. We must intervene by systematically dismantling that pathological reward structure and teaching replacement behaviors that offer a healthy path to tension relief.
So if the aggression loop is chemically reinforced and biologically ingrained, what is the behavioral fix? This is where we turn to what is really the most effective framework for addressing these deeply entrenched antisocial and aggressive behaviors: cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
And CBT is not passive, it's action-oriented, it's collaborative, and it is highly structured. The core theory is that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors all mutually influence each other. They exist in a constant feedback loop.
Okay.
So if an individual can systematically change the problematic element, whether it's a destructive thought pattern or an ineffective behavior, it will necessarily lead to shifts in the others.
So in the context of aggression, what are the specific targets?
The targets are very specific. You're identifying and disputing the unhelpful thoughts that justify entitlement and blame. You're teaching skills to manage the intense negative feelings that lead to that high arousal, and you're systematically replacing ineffective, coercive behaviors like violence or intimidation with pro-social ones like assertive communication.
let's break down the mechanics using the CBT triangle. How does this play out in real time for someone prone to road rage or IPV?
Okay, the triangle starts with a situation. Let's say a partner critiques the aggressor's choice of television program. A simple thing.
Right.
This situation instantly triggers an automatic thought, which is often hidden. She thinks I'm an idiot. This is a cognitive distortion called mind reading. That thought immediately leads to intense feelings, specifically shame, humiliation, and instantly translated rage. And that feeling then dictates the behavior, which is a verbal attack or physical intimidation.
And that creates the vicious cycle.
The vicious cycle. And the key insight, which we touched on earlier, is that the individual usually only registers the intense feeling, the overwhelming rage, which they feel justifies their action. They completely miss the automatic, often instantaneous thought, she's trying to frustrate me, or I'm being disrespected. That generated the feeling in the first place.
So the power of CBT is in making that thought visible.
Exactly. Unlike feelings, thoughts are, at least theoretically, accessible and controllable. By teaching the person to pause and challenge that thought, is it 100% true that she thinks I'm an idiot? What's the evidence for that? They find the pathway to interrupting the cycle before the behavior escalates.
But before intervening, the clinician needs to understand why the violent behavior continues. This is the role of functional behavior analysis, or FBA.
That's a crucial step. FBA moves beyond just asking, why are you angry, to asking, what does the behavior achieve? The premise is simple. Behavior continues because it is reinforced. It works.
But you have to look wider than just the trigger, right?
Right. Oh, much wider. We have to consider the setting events. These are background conditions that increase the likelihood of the behavior occurring days or even hours later, way before the specific trigger happens.
So what are some examples of setting events?
Things like chronic lack of sleep, high financial debt, ongoing substance use, or a persistent chronic illness. When these setting events are present, the threshold for aggression is already way, way lower.
So if a man is deeply stressed about debt and hasn't slept properly for 3 days, those are the setting events. A minor annoyance from his partner, the trigger, is far more likely to launch him into a full-blown aggressive reaction than if he were rested and financially secure.
Precisely. Now, regarding the common functions of IPV behavior, we see a clear pattern.
Yeah.
It's always about getting something wanted, control, compliance, winning the argument, or most commonly, achieving relief from internal frustration or anxiety.
Or avoiding something.
Or getting out of something unwanted, avoiding accountability, escaping uncomfortable feelings like rejection or fear, or just dodging responsibility.
Can you give us a classic reinforcement example?
The classic example is simple. Intimidation yelling, slamming a fist, is rewarded if the partner immediately backs down, complies, or shifts their behavior to placate the aggressor. That behavior achieved the goal of control, so it's filed away by the brain as a successful strategy. FBA allows the treatment to focus on rewarding replacement behaviors that achieve the same need, like getting relief or expressing a need, but through pro-social, non-violent means.
Okay, so because IPV often involves these intense, overwhelming negative emotions, rage, jealousy, profound anxiety, that can destabilize the entire CBT structure, we need an advanced tool set.
We do.
And that's where dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, comes in.
That's right. DBT was initially developed for individuals struggling with overwhelming emotional dysregulation and is now widely adapted for IPV intervention. It's fundamentally an enhanced form of CBT, but it introduces the dialectical concept.
And this is crucial for the aggressive mindset.
So crucial. A dialectic is the tension between two opposing ideas that are both true-like, the tension between acceptance and change. Aggressors often operate in a black or white, all-or-nothing world. I am right, you are wrong, or it is all your fault, or it is all my fault.
There's no gray area.
None! DBT forces them to confront the reality that two seemingly contradictory things can be true at once. For example, I accept that I have these overwhelming feelings, and I need to change how I react to them. This balancing act is essential for moving past that rigidity.
It sounds incredibly difficult, especially for someone fueled by entitlement and a lifetime of needing to be right.
It is extremely challenging, but the structured, skills-based approach of DBT helps them navigate that middle ground. The whole treatment framework shifts the focus from their partner's actions to their own internal ability to regulate, which leads us directly into the practical skills they learn to interrupt the aggressive cycle.
Let's get into the practical application. How do you actually train someone to insert a pause between the trigger and the explosion? It starts with a kind of forensic self-awareness, right? Breaking down the aggression sequence in minute detail.
For that detailed forensic look, therapists use the chain analysis, which is a core DBT tool. This is a micro-level postmortem of the aggressive behavior designed to show the individual every single point where they could have chosen a different path.
So you're mapping it out.
Mapping it out completely. The components are, first, the vulnerability factors, the setting events we just discussed, like sleep and stress. Then, the prompting event, or trigger. The critical part is what we call the links. The specific thoughts, body sensations like a clenching fist or a hot flush, feelings like rage or shame, and micro actions like a raised voice or an aggressive posture.
So all the little steps.
All the little steps that connect the trigger to the ultimate problem behavior, the physical violence, the coercion, the brake check.
And identifying those links is the only way to find the interception points. If you only focus on the trigger and the final behavior, you miss the opportunity to intervene.
Exactly. The goal is to identify that specific moment, the tightening in the chest, the automatic thought of, I must win, and insert a skilled behavior to disrupt the chain. Once the chain is complete, they analyze the immediate and delayed consequences, forcing them to confront the rewards, like tension relief, versus the long-term costs, like damage to relationships or legal trouble.
This is where the power of skill transferability becomes impossible to ignore. We have this really powerful anecdote of a man we'll call Marco. Marco was initially skeptical, court-ordered to attend a program after a serious aggressive driving incident. He didn't think he had an anger problem. He thought he had an idiots in traffic problem.
A classic case of externalizing blame.
Completely. But the program was smart. It didn't just focus on laws. It focused on emotional regulation and identifying his triggers, that deep-seated feeling of being disrespected or controlled by external factors. Marco learned specific coping skills, particularly deep breathing and visualization, designed to create a pause when he felt that high arousal coming on in the car.
So he was practicing in the car.
He practiced recognizing that physiological surge, the hot flush, and the automatic urge to dominate and win the road confrontation. That muscle memory was built on the asphalt.
And this practice paid off in a radically different context.
It did. Months later, Marco was in a conflict with his partner. The disagreement began to escalate rapidly. He described feeling the familiar physical sensations, the tightening in his throat, the overwhelming feeling of heat, the mental certainty that he was right and had to silence the opposition.
The exact physical process.
The exact same physical process he'd been trained to notice in his Nissan. And the breakthrough was that the established routine kicked in. He recognized the physiological warning signs, applied the exact same breathing technique he used to prevent a road incident, created the pause, and was able to ask for a timeout instead of exploding into violence or coercion.
So he transferred the skill.
He successfully transferred the learned skill from a public setting to the intimacy of his home, preventing an explosion simply by regulating his nervous system.
That transition is evidence that emotional regulation training, even when focused on aggressive driving programs, operates as a profound public health strategy. It retrains the individual's threat perception and provides generalized, transferable coping mechanisms.
And Marco's skill is part of a core set of skills, right?
Yes, the distress tolerance skills, designed to manage an emotional crisis without making the situation worse. This starts with mindfulness, teaching the aggressor to be aware of the present moment without judgment. Simple exercises, like a mini mindfulness moment where you just focus intently on 5 or 6 breaths or a full body scan, can ground the person in their physical reality rather than letting their mind spin into justifying rage.
And the physiological intervention is fundamental. You mentioned deep breathing. Why is the technique so specific? I've heard different numbers.
It's specific because the goal is to hijack the nervous system. The technique isn't just deep breathing. It must be slow, focused breathing that targets the vagus nerve. This nerve connects the brain to the major organs and is key to regulating the parasympathetic system, the rest and digest response.
So what's the recommended technique?
The recommended technique is a 4-second inhale, a 4-second hold, and specifically a 6-second exhale. It's designed to be longer on the exhale. That extended exhale actively dampens the sympathetic activation, effectively putting the brakes on the adrenaline and norepinephrine cascade. It forces the heart rate to slow down, allowing the muscles to relax, and bringing the person out of that immediate fight or flight response.
What if the person is already too far gone, too high in arousal to even do controlled breathing?
That's where other distress tolerance skills come in. We teach radical acceptance. Now, this is not resignation, but a choice to accept reality as it is, the things that cannot be changed. For an entitled person, acceptance is often viewed as defeat.
A weakness.
A weakness. The challenge is motivating them to realize that fighting against reality like fighting traffic or fighting a partner's opinion only increases their own suffering, leading to more anger and anxiety. Accepting the unchangeable actually lowers distress.
And how do you handle those moments of acute, blinding rage where the person needs an immediate distraction?
For that, we use methods for acute distraction, often encapsulated by the acronym ACCEPTS. This is a list of sensory-based activities designed to pull the mind out of the overwhelming emotional spiral. We dedicate significant time to breaking down each letter and practicing them.
We should give our audience the full breakdown here. I think this is crucial for understanding the depth of this intervention.
Absolutely. The letters stand for A is for activities. Engaging in a distracting activity that requires attention, like solving a puzzle, reading a novel, or working on a craft.
Okay. A for activities.
The first C is for contributing. Engaging in an activity that helps others, like volunteering, helping a neighbor, or running an errand for a friend. This shifts focus from internal pain to external purpose. The second C is for comparisons. Comparing your current situation to past times when things were much worse, thereby grounding the current level of distress.
E.
E is for emotions, opposite. Engaging in activities that generate an opposite emotion to the one you are feeling. If you're raging, watching a comedy or listening to calming music can physically shift the emotional state. P is for pushing away. Intentionally putting the painful thoughts and feelings aside temporarily. This isn't avoidance, but a conscious, time-limited decision to distract until the peak emotion subsides. T is for thoughts, other. Engaging the mind in a highly focused, distracting mental activity like counting backwards from 1,000 by sevens or memorizing poetry.
And finally, S.
S is for sensations. Using the 5 senses to focus on the body and the environment. Holding an ice cube, splashing cold water on your face, which activates the dive reflex and slows the heart rate, or focusing intensely on a strong scent like peppermint.
That level of detailed planning shows that the intervention is fighting fire with highly organized, practiced water.
It is. And finally, specific to IPV, we have to discuss anger management. Anger is the most common emotional state precipitating violence, but there is a massive cognitive error at play.
Yeah, what's that?
Many individuals engaging in IPV lack the emotional literacy to differentiate between various negative emotional states. They may be experiencing deep fear, high anxiety, profound jealousy, or feelings of personal inadequacy. But because anger is the most powerful and frankly the most justifying emotion, they label all of it as anger.
And that label then licenses the aggressive response.
Exactly. So the first step is teaching them to identify the source feeling, to recognize, I am feeling afraid of rejection right now, not just angry that my partner is late.
And once they can recognize the true underlying feeling, they need an action plan.
They do. They must learn to recognize the early physical warning signs, the hot feeling, the tightening jaw, the rapid-fire thoughts of blame, the raised voice, and initiate the timeout.
This sounds simple, but a timeout in a heated argument is often resisted by the aggressive individual because it feels like losing control.
It is the hardest skill to learn. The timeout requires a prearranged, explicit agreement with the partner. It has to be non-punitive, not used as a threat or a final escape. The rule is, when the warning signs appear, the person must walk away for a specific agreed-upon duration, usually 30 minutes, to use their distress tolerance skills.
So they're regulating their physiology, not just avoiding the discussion.
Correct. And the essential commitment is that they must return to the discussion once they are calm.
So the ability to manage emotional distress is foundational. But for sustainable change, we have to address the unhelpful thoughts that generate the initial emotional explosion and fuel the aggression. We have to systematically challenge the core of entitlement and externalized blame.
We specifically target ingrained thinking traps. These are cognitive distortions like black and white thinking. If she doesn't agree with me, our relationship is doomed. Or catastrophizing. If this traffic delay makes me late, my entire day will be ruined.
Or the destructive need to always be right, which justifies aggressively challenging every single contrary opinion.
Exactly. And crucially, we have the highly problematic IPV supportive thoughts that rationalize the violence.
What do those look like in practice?
They include thoughts that justify abusive behavior like, I had to yell to make my point heard. Thoughts that viciously blame the partner. She pushed my buttons. She deserves this reaction. minimizing the impact of the behavior. It was just a word. She's overreacting. And upholding the central sense of entitlement. As the head of this house, I am owed respect and compliance.
These thoughts have to be dismantled for recovery to even begin.
They do.
So how do you effectively argue against a deeply held self-serving belief system without sounding, preachy?
We use the Socratic methodological questioning. The therapist guides the client to identify the evidence that supports their negative, aggressive thought versus the evidence that contradicts it.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If the thought is, she is trying to make me angry, the therapist might ask, if that were true, what is she gaining by achieving your anger? Has this aggression ever truly solved the root problem, or has it created more problems in the long run? This forces the person to realize the thought is based on a habit and an assumption, not logical fact.
And this brings us back to that dialectical truth.
It often does. The realization that two things can be true simultaneously. For instance, I feel frustrated by my partner's actions, and my choice to respond aggressively is 100% my responsibility, regardless of what they did. This decoupling of the partner's behavior from the aggressor's choice of reaction is perhaps the most profound cognitive shift required for permanent change.
So once emotional regulation and cognitive correction are established, the focus shifts to building pro-social behavior, right? Specifically through effective communication and relationship skills. They need tools to get their needs met without resorting to intimidation.
The cornerstone here is assertiveness. This is the vital middle ground. If they are being aggressive, they are bullying. If they are passive, they are suppressing their feelings, which leads to resentment and eventual explosion. Assertiveness means respectfully asking for what you want or need, stating your position clearly, and doing so without judgment or hostile body language.
What's the single most important lesson about assertiveness that counteracts that entitlement mindset?
The crucial distinction is this. You have a right to ask for what you want or need, but you are not entitled to get it. The other person has the right to say no, and your response to that no must remain non-aggressive.
And that's where the emotional regulation skills become essential, managing the disappointment without detonating.
Precisely. We teach concrete communication skills. First, the use of I statements to express feelings and take ownership of their own emotional experience. Instead of the blaming statement, you were late and inconsiderate and you ruined the dinner, they learn to say, I feel worried and frustrated when you come home late because I start to imagine scenarios where you are hurt.
And that immediately de-escalates the tension because the partner isn't receiving an attack, they are hearing a vulnerability.
Exactly. We also introduce reflective listening, which means paraphrasing what the partner said. What I hear you saying is that you felt overwhelmed by the request for an explanation, to show genuine understanding, even if you disagree with the content. Feeling heard is the bedrock of nonviolent conflict resolution.
Ultimately, the goal isn't just to stop the violence, but to build a genuinely healthy relationship. The skills need to move beyond de-escalation into shared enjoyment and constructive conflict. We often rely on the influential work that define the patterns that predict relationship failure, the destructive behaviors known as the 4 horsemen.
The 4 horsemen, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, are the escalating stages of hostility. Criticism attacks the person. You always forget X, you're so selfish. Contempt is communicating disgust. Look at you getting upset over that. Defensiveness is warding off a perceived attack instead of listening, and stonewalling is withdrawing completely to avoid conflict.
And the intervention provides specific, practiced antidotes to replace these patterns. Let's walk through the core skill replacement in a conversational example.
Okay, let's take criticism. Instead of criticizing the partner's character, you are so lazy you never clean up. The antidote is the gentle startup. This focuses on the specific situation and the speaker's feeling, expressing a complaint without blame.
What would that sound like?
An example would be, I feel stressed when the dishes pile up in the sink. Could we decide on a time to tackle them tonight?
And for contempt.
For contempt, the antidote is building a culture of appreciation. When the impulse is to ridicule or express disgust, they are coached to remind themselves of their partner's positive qualities, literally flooding the mind with positive thoughts to counter the judgment.
And defensiveness.
Yeah.
The natural tendency is to immediately justify or deflect.
The antidote to defensiveness is taking responsibility, even if it's only for a small part of the conflict. The shift from, it's not my fault you started it, to something like, I hear your perspective and I can take responsibility for snapping at you earlier. That wasn't helpful. This just disarms the entire argument.
And finally, stonewalling.
Against stonewalling, the ultimate withdrawal, the skill is physiological self-soothing and a timeout. If the arousal is too high, they must stay there taking a 30-minute timeout to calm their nervous system, and then, and this is key, they must explicitly return and resume the discussion. This prevents the relationship from stagnating in avoidance.
The culmination of all this intensive work, from identifying the neurochemical rush to practicing gentle startups, is relapse prevention. Because stress will return, and the old habits are powerful.
A robust relapse prevention plan is personalized and comprehensive. It involves identifying personalized triggers like specific dates, holidays, financial stress points, drinking, and developing clear red flags.
And what are those red flags?
They're the early warning signs that they are sliding back. Smaller coercive behaviors, high levels of justification in their thoughts, arguing past the point of resolution, or starting to blame traffic for their emotional state again.
So the plan has to incorporate everything.
It has to incorporate all learned skills, the deep breathing, the Socratic questioning, the use of I statements, and address the dynamic risk factors like sleep, substance use, and debt to create a robust firewall against sliding back into the old aggressive pattern. It's a lifetime commitment to awareness and skill application.
So what does this all mean? When we started with that jarring scenario of the Nissan driver performing a brake check, we asked if that rage simply turns off at home. And the evidence, drawn from forensic psychology, neurobiology, and clinical practice, says emphatically that it does not. The aggression we see in traffic is a visible public manifestation of an underlying pathological system seeking control through dominance, a system reinforced by neurochemical reward.
The synthesis is that the intensive therapeutic tools developed for serious domestic violence intervention, the cognitive restructuring of CBT, the emotional regulation of DBT, provide a powerful, scalable blueprint for public health strategy.
So what we learn in one area can be applied everywhere.
Yes. When we invest in teaching skills like chain analysis, deep breathing that targets the vagus nerve, and accountability reframing, even within contexts like aggressive driving programs, we are effectively retraining the individual's foundational threat perception.
These are not siloed skills.
Not at all. The ability to pause before risking a collision over a horn honk is built on the same vital, transferable emotional regulation skills required for nonviolent, healthy living in a relationship. By recognizing aggression as a predictable, reinforced pattern, we can treat it proactively. Understanding that skill application under stress, be it on asphalt or in the living room, creates a change that truly can bleed forward, creating calmer homes, safer workplaces, and healthier social hierarchies.